All right, Awesemo, here we go. It's your old pal EMac stepping in here for the first time on the NBA Live Before Lock, a special new show series that we've put together here. Brilliant brainstorm. I'm sure you were involved in that somehow, Greg. I am joined by one Greg Ehrenberg, one of the many in our stable of amazing NBA analysts. I think we have one of the deeper crews, as the kids used to say, than anybody else. It's pretty impressive, the collection of talent here. How are you doing, Greg?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty significant when you say what the kids used to say, because that's what, for you, 40 years ago. Like, I mean, we're going way back. If we're talking about deeper stables, we also have one of the older stables, thanks to our old pal EMac here. It's been a while since we worked together, so I definitely wanted to come out a little hot and
on you
a little bit.
Absolutely. But this is the best part is the barbs from Greg. I enjoy watching the hosts get them. Now here I go. Hopefully I have thick enough skin to survive here. But
it's the only way I can really come at you because, of course, you're noted head of the Fred Van Elite fan club. And we're looking at one of the best scoring games in NBA history from your guy, Fred VanVleet, who, at least last we had checked before we started, he had, he was closing in on the Raptors' all-time record for points in a game. He's at 46 points on 11 of 13 shooting from three. So there's not too much else bad I could say about EMac because his favorite player in the world is going off for 1 million points.
Yeah, it's been an exciting one. The funny one, the other one I remembered, and I was gonna write it up as something, but I just said, nobody likes the revenge angle. But my thought for revenge was going to be Fred VanVleet showing out against Terrence Ross and taking away the most current 3-point record from him. And guess what? He's doing that right now. VanVleet now has 11. Terrence Ross, I'm wearing my University of Washington sweatshirt here. Terrence Ross from the University of Washington had a 10 made three-pointer performance, scored 51 points, second most points in Toronto Raptor history. That was back, I think, in 2014 or 2015. I actually played him on that day. It was a great day back in DFS. And then the funny thing is, Fred VanVleet would have actually been like a sophomore, freshman or sophomore, I think, at Wichita State. So he wasn't even close. But here he is coming and saying, no, I want this record. So the all-time Toronto Raptors record is 12 three-pointers in one game. I want to say it's the luminary Donyell Marshall, I believe, had it. Yes, not Donnie Marshall, but Donyell Marshall.
And here's the good news. If you did not play Fred VanVleet on the early slate, we're talking about the late slate, so you could go try to chase those losses. You could try to get it all back on this late 2-game slate. By the way, just because some people asked me, or one person asked in the Slack chat anyway, what was the most DraftKings points ever scored in a game? Fred VanVleet, not quite that level, but he's having a pretty crazy game. James Harden has the record. He actually did it twice, 103.5 fantasy points on DraftKings. One came against the Magic on January 30th, 2018. And one against the Knicks on December 31st, 2016. He had 53 points, 16 rebounds, and 17 assists that game. This was before DraftKings, but the most fantasy points that would have ever been scored in an individual game, at least dating back to the times that steals and blocks were recorded. Michael Jordan on March 28th of 1990, 112 DK points, 69 points, 18 rebounds, 6 assists, 4 steals, and a block in a game against the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, there were some amazing when you think about some of those games that like Jordan and Olajuwon and Dominique Wilkins and Larry Bird and those guys had. It was crazy because the coaches were all, no, don't take the 3-pointer. You want to be closer to the baskets. That's better. So the elbow jumper was a thing back then, which now is like one of the worst shots ever. But let's get back to today. We've got we're just waiting a moment here for everybody to come in. Not to worry, we have 2 games tipping off at 10 o'clock tonight. We've got many things to go over with you, and we're just waiting for people to kind of collect on this and come in because this is like the 4th show of this series that we've done. We're going to do it again tomorrow night, 8:45 for a 9:30 lock. So you will definitely want to check us out. And we're going to do these most weekdays where there is sort of these island games because the sites have more or less indicated that they're going to make some very, very large prize pools. Tonight on the 2-game slate, I took these about 20 minutes ago, but we have DraftKings has over $500,000 in their 2-game slate. They've got $250,000 worth of contests. These are amongst their higher paid guaranteed prize pool contests combined together. They have about $250,000 there. FanDuel has $250,000 in the 2-game slate. All sites tonight are focusing on the Boston and the Golden State Warriors for their showdown. That also includes Super Draft. They have a couple slates out there. And then Yahoo has a 2-gamer. running tonight. So lots of stuff going on there. We have no injuries of note here in the Detroit and Utah game. Everybody is back. Last night, obviously, there was the late suspension or postponement of the Detroit Denver game. There was an inconclusive test, as best I could tell. I looked this afternoon to see what they had said, but I didn't follow up. But it sounds like there was an inconclusive test there that sort of was then turned into contact tracing, and then was just the abundance of caution. So everybody should be good to go at this point for Detroit. That test did come back, or whomever it was with came back with a negative test afterwards. And then in Boston, we don't have for the Celtics, Marcus Smart. I think he's out for a couple weeks. And then Peyton Pritchard also out. You've got Kemba Walker, who was very discounted on DraftKings and FanDuel, 6,700 and 5,700, if I'm remembering correctly. And then Golden State is going to be without James Wiseman. It sounds like Kevon Looney is going to stay in the starting lineup, and we're expecting Eric Paschall to pick up some of the minutes. My guess is 3 or 4 minutes are going to go to Looney, and then the rest, Paschall is going to step in and get. Anything you want to talk about amongst those moving parts, or take us away with your, well, now let's do the Detroit game first, since that's the less exciting one. Let's save the good one for seconds.
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing, if people just listen to EMac talk right there for whatever, a minute and a half it was, that's all the information you need. He summed up the slate pretty good right there. He hit on all the news. He got all the best plays, some of the pricing values. Detroit, yeah, this is definitely the least appealing team on the slate. They're playing in Utah. Not only is it a hard matchup, what makes this slate tricky is Utah is favored by 12.5 points, and this is one of probably the more likely blowout games we've seen the entire season, because Utah has been incredible this year, and the Pistons, most of their games end up being pretty one-sided. Even the recent game that they actually won was a game against the Lakers. They won that game by 15. So there's been very few competitive games that the Pistons have played in lately. I mean, their last game, they lost to the Warriors by 27. Then I said the 15-point win over the Lakers, then a loss to the Cavaliers by 15. A lot of their games this year have been decided by double digits. So I mean, it's a 2-game slate, so there's no way to avoid any individual team or the players. The Pistons are definitely the lowest priority team of anybody on the slate. Jeremy Grant, just because of the usage that goes to him, he is, to me, overall the best play from the Pistons, a little bit of a stronger play on FanDuel than DraftKings. Moving down, I think that Derrick Rose, if we're looking at one of the cheaper plays, he makes for the best value option. The minutes have not been there for Derrick Rose recently. However, a lot of that has just been by the nature of the Pistons playing in so many one-sided games. When they've played competitive games, we've seen him get slightly more minutes. We've seen him get up to 28 minutes this year. And you look at the usage rate for him in recent games, the last 2 games, 36% and 32% for Derrick Rose. So if the Pistons keep it relatively close, then I think we could see Derrick Rose with a 30+% usage rate. And that would probably be enough to make him one of the better value plays on a 2-game slate where it's pretty hard to find value.
All right, we've got a little bit of news here.
Oh, da-da-da. What's the news?
We have a new single game scoring leader for the Toronto Raptors. Fred VanVleet has now tied. Who did you say was first? I've lost track of that already in my excitement.
Oh, I looked it up. That was information I looked up before the show.
VanVleet has 52.
It was right. So it was DeMar DeRozan had 52.
Yes, you're right. It was DeRozan at 52. Tyson Ross Terrence Ross had 51,
and Vince Carter also had a 51-point game, and then there was 48-point games by also Vince Carter and Donyell Marshall.
Yes. So good times there. All right, now he just needs one more 3-pointer to tie Donyell Marshall for that record. Woo, this is a good one. I'm pretty excited here. All right, we're just having a little fun there. We got some new soundboard stuff like that we're working on. So just enjoy. We're goofing around here, but nothing to panic on. And by the way, we don't play around with fake news. I wouldn't do any announcements like that if we were like 5 minutes or less to lock, because I have enough panic when I'm doing these things. No need for me to generate that for anybody else. So the Derrick Rose thing here, do you feel, and I was so busy watching the Fred VanVleet, but do you feel that he is a good pivot away from someone like Kemba Walker?
So not necessarily off of Kemba Walker. And so let's talk about this from a FanDuel and a DraftKings angle. On DraftKings, I mean, they're in totally different price tiers, right? Kemba Walker is $6,700 and Derrick Rose is $4,500. So we're talking about guys with a $2,200 price difference between them. I think relative to his price, and he's not picking up that much ownership from what we have projected 23.4% projected ownership for Derrick Rose. I mean, in general, that's significant, but for a 2-game slate, that's really not. So in the lineups I built, I went overweight to Derrick Rose by a pretty significant amount. I think that he's kind of in a price range where it's hard to find value, like I said before. And I think that makes him just definitely one of the guys you want to target to save money with. The only thing that prevents me from saying that he's, an all-in player, somebody you want to go like 80% on, is that the Pistons are such significant underdogs in this game. Yeah. It's very realistic. We only see 18 to 20 minutes from Derrick Rose because that's what we've seen in the last couple of games when they've gotten blown out.
Yeah, and it's looking like they are about a dozen-point underdog. I'll look for an update on that. But I want to thank everybody watching for helping us to get to 50,000 subscribers. As a thank you for all of you guys, we've got a pinned tweet over there on Awesemo_COM. I'm going to drop that link here into the YouTube chat. Go on over there. We are almost at 30,000 followers on Twitter. That's pretty cool. 2, follow the instructions on the pin tweet, and you will have a chance to win one of 50. That's one of 50 one-week passes that we are giving away. You must enter that content or follow those instructions by noon tomorrow. And then everybody that has appropriately followed the instructions will be part of a drawing to get one of the 50 prizes. It looks right now like you probably have about a 1 in 3 or a 1 in 4 chance of getting one of those prizes. I'm sure there will be a little bit more of a push tomorrow as we get closer, but odds are pretty good if you go over there and follow that. The other thing I wanted to mention are the free tools that we have available tonight. We have the NBA player projections. Those are free, 2-game slates, but you also have your showdown stuff there. That will convert nicely for you, but that's on the NBA player projections page. And then the NHL player projections page also is free today. They have a 2-game late slate starting at 10. And then tennis is back. There's a tournament in Melbourne that's going on for the next couple days. This is in prep for the Australian Open, which is on February 8th. They go off at 9:30 and then 12:30 tonight, or I guess slightly into tomorrow, but about 3 hours, 15 minutes from now for that. And we do have projections for tennis. That is premium, but I wanted to let everybody know that. And then finally, we also have college basketball, free article every day, as well as projections. The projections have been very, very good. There aren't that many good sources out there. The contests aren't giant, but with these projections, it's been, you have more than a fighting chance of a minimum cash. So I like those. Have you dabbled into any of these ancillary sports, or with all of your content and shows and multiple major sports going on, you just sticking with those these days, Greg?
Yeah, so here's the other thing also. If I'm doing 1 to 2 basketball shows per day, especially live before lock, it's pretty much impossible to do other sports, especially leading up to lock. Like, when am I going to have time to play other lineups? Especially if there was hockey news that happened right before basketball lock, there's no chance I would see it. Like, I know it gets posted in our Slack chat, but I'm in the middle of a basketball show talking about basketball. So, I mean, I would like to if I didn't have other things to do, but here I am with you. I'd rather hang out with you instead, EMac.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Likewise. And Tyler, we're counting you in this trio as well. Tyler's behind the glass producing tonight for our show. Finishing up here on Detroit, any of their ancillary players interest you at all? Perhaps Jackson, anybody else deeper down the bench? If this might be a blowout, we know that they're in the middle, even though they were off last night, they still are in the middle of their road trip here. Do you think some of those Saddiq Bey types will get any extra run in the event we build lineups for that particular outcome?
So somebody like Saddiq Bey could, except he's also not really part of the rotation, so he's not somebody I'd be looking to roster. When I'm looking at guys that I think could benefit from a blowout, that I'm actually willing to roster. And on a 2-game slate, it's something I'm willing to take a little bit more seriously because it's 2 games. We could play a little bit more for a game script type thing. I want to look for somebody who is number one actually in the rotation already, because if somebody isn't in the rotation and maybe the game's a blowout, and it's like, hey, they play the last 7 minutes of the game. I mean, how many players we were rostering who were only expecting 7 minutes from on the whole? So number one, I want the guy to be actually in the rotation. And number two, I want it to be a player that I could expect to play in garbage time. And there actually are 2 of those guys that stand out to me on the Pistons roster. Number one is somebody you just mentioned, Josh Jackson. I think that he's somebody that makes sense for a blowout game scenario. And then the other one is Isaiah Stewart, who actually rates out kind of decently as a value play anyway. I have him projected for about 16 fantasy points. I think Alex had him projected for a little bit more than that. So Isaiah Stewart at nearly min price on DraftKings, he makes some sense to me. But this would be purely in a blowout situation I'd want to get to these guys. So the other thing I would consider also with guys like Josh Jackson and Isaiah Stewart, I wouldn't want to go overweight with Jazz guys in lineups with these two because we're assuming that if they have good games, it's because of a blowout. So I wouldn't want to roster Isaiah Stewart with, say, Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, because in the situation where Isaiah Stewart plays most of the fourth quarter, we're going to assume that guys like Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell aren't playing in the fourth quarter.
All right. We have a fun question, so I'm going to ask it before it goes away. This is from friend of the show, Stalwart, who is always in chat. Brad, this is on the YouTube channel. He says, Greg, talk me out of Looney. EMac talked me into Looney. Well, here's the talking you in here. We've got Looney is probably, my assessment was, I expect to see Looney picking up about another 4 to 5 minutes. That's probably going to get him 19, 20, 21, somewhere around there. It seems like a reasonable base. He's about 0.85 FanDuel and Yahoo points per minute, but it costs us our center slot. On the other hand, you have Eric Paschall, who is about the same, a similar producer, a little closer to 0.8. But then it depends who you take on and off the court, because he's been in and out of the lineup so many times. So we'll just call them kind of a wash there. He's helps you out with that other position eligibility. So if you want to burn your center, no Rudy Gobert. If we're on the one center side, that would be the case. /4/against. Do you have a lean on either of those guys? Because I have a feeling they're going to be popular, and we'll talk about Utah. But before we get to this other one, as people are trying to use some of the cheapies here, do you have a lean between those guys?
Yeah, so I mean, there's only so many viable cheap options on a 2-game slate, and Kevon Looney and Eric Paschall are two of the stronger ones. On DraftKings, even on the main slate, and now we're talking about 2 games. On the main slate, I found it really difficult to get away from Eric Paschall. Now on a 2-game slate, it's even more difficult to get away from him. Number one, he has the small forward position eligibility on both the main slate and this slate for DraftKings. It was a position that was relatively difficult to fill compared to the other options. It was certainly harder to fill than, say, the center spot, where we had guys, like Vucevic to pay up for as one of the top plays on the slate. So Looney, at least we had other options for the main slate. Eric Paschall, the positional flexibility made him really hard to stay away from. I'm not going to talk you away from Kevon Looney. I'm going to say don't go 100% on him, because we don't have that many studs to pay up for on the slate. So it's not like you need to roster him to get up to, a Giannis Antetokounmpo or Luka Doncic or anything, because those guys don't exist on the slate. The only argument against Kevon Looney would be that you don't need to save all that much salary for this particular slate. But I'm not going to talk you out of him entirely. If you're playing one lineup, my preference would be to play Kevon Looney on DraftKings. If you're playing one lineup on FanDuel, though, my preference would be to roster Rudy Gobert at center.
Okay, that sounds fair. Transition us on over here to the Utah side. You mentioned Gobert, reasonably good matchup for him going against Plumlee. I think the guys I like the most on this, I like Jordan Clarkson, I like Joe Ingles, and I like Conley. And that's kind of where I landed on the main slate. That's kind of where I'm landing now. I'm not breaking the bank on any of them. To your point, it's one of those where I'm leaning that this is more or less going to be a runaway. Those are the guys I think might get more of the run, but we do know that that oftentimes Utah just keeps their starters in for their first part of the fourth quarter rotation. This feels like a game that could get out of hand. Anything goes in the NBA these days. We've seen all sorts of upsets. The more 3-pointers they take, no fans in the stands, or very limited, and then or the compressed schedule is just kind of throwing variance. It's ratcheting it up to 11, if you will. So anything goes, but this feels like something I would kind of want to plan for. And those are the guys I'm looking at. Plus, as you mentioned with the Detroit side, these guys all have stable roles in the rotation. The only one I didn't mention is Bojan Bogdanovic, who's coming off 2 really good games. We did not project him all that well the last time I looked. Was there something that changed? I know you're someone that does your own projections and works through all of the rotations and looks at anything. Was there anything to think that he is going to be closer to low 20s, as in 21, 20, 22, 23 points, or high 20s?
No, not really. So here's the Utah's getting healthier now. They had, Donovan Mitchell missed games, Joe Ingles missed games, and then Joe Ingles also came back on a minutes restriction. So far, that hasn't really been a huge deal for Bogdanovic, so I don't have an issue with him for a 2-game slate. Mike Conley, to me, is a site-dependent play. I know you mentioned him. Do you like him on FanDuel, DraftKings, or both?
I'm just doing DraftKings for the main.
Okay, all right, so that makes sense, because on DraftKings, I think he makes for a very strong play at 6,400. On FanDuel, I don't really like his price point at 7,000 because I have Kemba Walker projected for more fantasy points than him at a 5,700 price tag. So Kemba Walker for $1,300 less. So we're talking about FanDuel. I prefer to go to Kemba Walker and Mike Conley to me at 7,000. It's a little pricey for him on FanDuel. On DraftKings, I agree with you. Mike Conley at 6,400 makes for one of the better mid-range plays on the slate.
Yeah, and much like you sticking to one sport, you're playing on a couple different sites. I still am doing hockey, but I'm kind of doing everything on DraftKings just so I can stay on one side from that standpoint. But yes, things get a little tricky here, but that's good that we have a little bit of a dichotomy on the slates that we're looking at here. Do you think, so you've been doing projections for a long time, and I find it interesting that a lot of our, almost all of our hosts do. I know Terry does his own projections. I believe Eric does, you do. Laffy doesn't. I don't. Laffy can do them if he wants to because he goes through all the rotations, but he just usually leans on Awesemos like I do. Adam obviously does. Josh obviously does. Do you feel that's really helped you? Oh, and Spags, I don't want to shortchange him. So basically, it's me and Laffy are the only ones that don't amongst everybody. Is that something you feel gives you a bit of an advantage? Do you recommend people that have a lot of time, maybe if they don't do their own projections, do like I do and utilize the add more funds or popcorn machine and start looking at game flows to understand things and read those rotations? But has that helped you a lot in your DFS growth?
All right. So what it's going to do, this is where I find it to be most beneficial. Sometimes you're going around the right side of it. Sometimes you're coming around the wrong side of it. I am generally going to like some players that nobody else likes. Right. And that could be good or bad. Like this slate, when I was talking about it earlier on the show, I said, when I did Live Before Lock, I said I liked Evan Fournier a lot, which, by the way, I thought Evan Fournier was going to end up being popular on the slate. We had him projected for a decent amount of ownership, and that just didn't end up being the case. But like Evan Fournier ended up being 12% owned on FanDuel, and I said that he was my favorite small forward play. Fred VanVleet was somebody else who I projected really well today, which, by the way, I'm still wrong on. Because people always think, they're like, oh, this is a really good projection because somebody scored 70 fantasy points. I didn't think he was going to score 70 fantasy points. I was very off on what the actual number I had him projected for was, but I had him projected as a good player as a good play for the slate relative to what his price tag was. So that's really what the benefit is to me, is that I'm just going to like players that are different from the field. I'm not necessarily going to fall into the same groupthink. Now, in general, if somebody's a chalk play, there's a decent chance they're a chalk play for a good reason, and there's a good chance that I will have that player projected well. The one thing I don't do that guys like, I know Alex does and Josh does it really well and Spags does it, they run the Sims, where then they're looking at what players' odds of ending up in the optimal lineup are relative to their projections and also relative to what the field has exposure to that player. And that's some of the ways that they're identifying some of the best and weakest plays on the slate is relative to the odds they project a player to be in the optimal lineup. I don't go to that far of an extent because I'm not smart enough. But I stick to the things that I am able to do, and that still helps me to identify some players that are good plays that I generally don't see the field on. The other thing also, it's very difficult to predict ownership. And we have some of the best ownership projections in all of DFS for every sport. However, still, the news changes so quickly in basketball that at any given point, the ownership could change on a dime. So I often like to try to look at the players that I have projected really well on a points per dollar basis. And then just by the nature of liking guys that are different from the field, that's going to benefit me in GPP. Sometimes I'm going to be right. Sometimes I'm going to be wrong. But at least when I'm right, I'm different than the field oftentimes. And so that's going to give me a better chance to win.
Okay, thank you. That was a good explanation. It's one of those things where I was sort of always curious how others have found that approach, and before, when it was only a few of our guys doing it, I know it takes time and a lot of extra effort to do it, but I was just curious how you did it for you. So what I wanted to sort of pivot into is, and then we'll let you wrap up this first game here, that we have these tools that will help us do that. We have the projections, obviously. We have the ownership projections, which, as Greg mentioned, more or less second to none of anything out there. We also do the ownership projections for the late slates, the express slates, etc., for basketball. I don't know of any other sites that are doing them outside of the main slate. There may be some. I'm not aware of them at this point. There weren't any last year that were doing it, to my knowledge. The other thing that we have that's very, very helpful is the boom bust tool. So you'll hear Spags and Josh talk a little bit about the Monte Carlo simulation. Basically, what that just means is they're running simulations of the games mathematically for outcomes, probabilities, ranges, etc. of success, and then they kind of see what happens. That allows them to know who's going to be in the optimal lineup. Alex, math master, he's done that all for us. It's called the boom bust tool. So within that, we have some really cool categories that we look at. We have what's called leverage, which tells you how over or under owned a player is based upon his success probability of being in the optimal lineup. And then we have the bust, which is their chance of getting less than 5x their value. And then we have the boom, which is their chance of getting 5x plus 10 more over whatever their salary is for that day. That's what I utilize a lot of, and that's something I've really started doing this year. I had gotten my process down of not really focusing on that as much. Now I'm kicking myself for not having used that in NFL and particularly in the showdown slates. We got one more showdown slate left for NFL. It's the Super Bowl. We have all sorts of content for you guys that'll be out there for that. But that has now turned into probably my favorite tool that we have, even more than my favorite NHL line stacking tool.
Oh, EMac with this fancy hockey exposure. Which, by the way, also I write a free article every day on the boom bust tool, which is just I just highlight some of the players that stand out as being likely to have big nights or likely to have bad nights, and generally try to focus on somebody that actually has ownership on the bad night, because it's easy enough to say, hey, this guy was going to play 0 minutes that is 0% exposure. I think he's going to have a bad night. I try to find somebody who I think is a weak play that the field is actually going to be on. By the way, talking about the Super Bowl, I only realized this recently. Did you realize that's a trademark term that people can't use in commercials or anything like that? Because yes. I see commercials
the big game.
All the time. Yeah, people talk about the big game. It makes me want to run my head through a wall. I'm like, who calls it? Because nobody calls it the big game. Nobody calls it that in the real world at all. And you see it constantly on commercials. I couldn't figure it out, and I just found out it's because it's trademarked.
Yeah, it's something that, having done content for a long time, you're always on that. Can I use it? Can I not use it? And there are certain rules around if you're using it in advertising for monetary purposes where you're going to make money off it. The answer is no. So you'll see a lot of people fudging that in some of the smaller areas of the fantasy sports world, but generally we try not to. But there are certain guidelines, and they're accessible guidelines. Because this is always a problem. But if you go to, like, back in Vegas or whatever, they have the big game watch parties. The hell is that? That's the only reason I know, is because I used to live out in Seattle, and we go down there to Vegas quite a bit. And I was, the hell's the big game? What are they talking about? Someone was like, oh, it's a Super Bowl. And I had the same exact reaction you just went through.
So I did DraftKings when they ran some contests. I think it was the original. Remember they did the first Super Bowl
with defensive players,
were they defensive players? I had to do all this content promoting the contest for the big game. Never knew what it was that I was including a link to in the entire thing. I never realized it was for the Super Bowl. So I was like, the big game, and it was in basketball content because there was no football games going at the time. I thought there was some big basketball contest coming up that they were promoting on DraftKings, but it was the Super Bowl, and I didn't know that was the big game.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to, and guys, we're just using this opportunity to let you know what our free content is. We still have 32 minutes. We'll see if there's anything else Craig has left unturned in this first game. Then we're going to talk about our second one here. We'll take some questions. We can talk about kind of anything you want, but he had mentioned his free boom bust article. I'll put that in the chat. Here's my free DFS building blocks article. This is usually one of our first articles that come out. We've expanded it now because we're jointly publishing it over as part of the Yahoo fantasy sports content, not directly for them, but just part of their fantasy sports content feed, which is pretty cool. So I've kind of expanded it on this. It takes me a little longer to write, but this will usually be posted around 11:30 or 12 each day. But what I do for this is to make it a worthwhile piece of content that has shelf life throughout the entire day, is I use core plays to talk about. These are the guys that their value is not going to change. I'm not going to try to guess who the good cheapies are. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in a compressed schedule, and the NFL or the NBA has finally gotten really good about injury reporting because it's not this big stigma anymore that they're saying, yeah, we're gonna rest our guys. So that's something that I think is very helpful. I talk about over leveraging a little bit with who I think it's going to be, and then I try to find somebody that's going to hang on and be good value. There's lessons in here. It'll kind of give you some teachable moments, and it'll give you something to think about for future slates. in that one. So that's definitely something that we try to do here is teach you, help you improve your game. And that's why we have 50,000 subscribers. So thank you. But do enjoy this free content. Take advantage of it. Anything else you want to talk about in our game that has the potential blowout, double-digit road dogs? What does this mean? They're going to score 29 points in the first quarter? The Pistons, that is. Isn't that how it works these days?
Probably not, but maybe. But I think we've pretty much covered everything from Detroit, Utah. So we can move on to talking about Boston, Golden State, which is a much better game. At least
hit on Jason Tatum. Hit on Jaylen Brown. I've talked way too much. Hit on the good stuff. Don't let me step on all the good stuff for you. You go enjoy those flowers.
Yeah. Well, I wish I had some crazy insightful analysis, but not really quite. The player that's most interesting here to talk about, I think, is Kemba Walker, who I think is too expensive on DraftKings at 6,700, but is too cheap on FanDuel at 5,700. So Kemba Walker, who's slowly having his minutes ceiling raised. He missed the start of the season due to off-season knee surgery. This was a lingering injury that he suffered in the bubble when they were in Orlando. And actually in the offseason, when he was getting ready to come back, Danny Ainge said that he regretted bringing Kemba Walker back to the bubble at all and felt they rushed him back. And they said they weren't sure if he was ever going to be the same player again. To this point, he hasn't played particularly well, but the usage is there for him. It's nice that the minutes are starting to come up. So I think that he should play somewhere around 30 minutes for this game. The other thing also is, like you said earlier, Marcus Smart is out. Peyton Pritchard is also out. So they're a little thin at point guard. And unless they're going to give Javonte Green and Jeff Teague big minutes, which I don't think is the case, then they're really going to need Kemba Walker to, start playing around the 30 minutes. So at that 5,700 price tag on FanDuel points per dollar, I think he makes for the best FanDuel point guard play. And then just a little bit too expensive at 6,700 on DraftKings. So talking about Kemba Walker, did you get to Kemba Walker exposure at all, or were you a little scared off by his recent performance? Because he's been terrible the last couple of games.
And that's what just sort of has me a little hesitant on it. And that's where I was going with kind of leaning towards the Mike Conley. I'd like to get up to Steph Curry if possible. And those are the two guys I sort of have my eye on. DeLon Wright, kind of feeds in there as another guard option on DraftKings. So those are the guys that come first to mind. But I don't know what to do with Kemba. We have to understand that he's probably appropriately priced for where he is. They have designs on going deep in the playoffs. I don't foresee him playing more than 32 minutes. Most games would kind of be my guess. I mean, I would think. So let's look at who has handled knee issues poorly. That would be the Detroit Pistons with Derrick Rose. Remember last year where all of a sudden he was having resurgence and had been great, and they just kept playing him every day. And it wasn't like burying him in minutes, but it was in 34 minutes. And then he got hurt. And it was like, why? You could have had a perfectly good trade asset here that you could have gotten something for, and you guys just screwed it around. Boston's not going to do that because they're going to go to the playoffs. They need Kemba Walker. I just don't know where the upside is, but at today's price point, we have upside based on the opponent. So that's sort of where I've landed, but at 6,700 on DK, to me, it feels neutral. FanDuel, I think that feels way too cheap. But again, you've got two spots. FanDuel's a unique build. You've got your roster constraint limitations, and you got to kind of look at it as sort of, your five questions on the test. How are you going to construct your lineup to get the most points? You have to treat it like a next level, in my opinion, next level showdown slate on steroids when it's a 2-game slate on FanDuel. And there's all sorts of decision points that happen within FanDuel. And then the other thing is if a lot of people are playing him, what do you think his kind of a good likely performance for Walker would be tonight on FanDuel scoring? 28, 32 FanDuel points, somewhere around there.
Well, are you asking what I expect from him, or what I would find to be acceptable?
What would you expect from him? So and then what do you think is acceptable?
I'm projected for over 30 fantasy points because as much as he's struggled so far this year, still, like we said, the minutes are going up and the usage has been pretty high. So the last couple of games, even though he shot poorly, he had a 23 and a 27% usage rate. His first 2 games coming back from knee injury, he had a 41% and a 36% usage rate. So even if the shots aren't always falling, it hasn't stopped Kemba Walker from shooting them. And now we also consider the point guard injuries they're dealing with, and also Marcus Smart, who not necessarily purely a point guard, but play some of the point guard minutes, they're going to need Kemba Walker to soak up some of that time. And then also there's opportunity for extra usage when he's on the court, because now we see the starting lineup that just came out. They have Tristan Thompson and Daniel Tice starting. Those are both lower usage players. So almost all of the shots in the starting lineup are going to Jaylen Brown, Kemba Walker, and Jason Tatum. So I think that Kemba Walker, he's projected to be the second highest owned point guard on FanDuel, with Steph Curry 1, Kemba Walker 2. I think for the price point, Kemba Walker warrants to have more ownership than Steph Curry does, though.
And I think those are all absolutely reasonable takes. And this is where I see some kind of a comments in the chat. Where's the value on this slate? And someone was kind of, basically it's going to be Looney and Paschall. But then some other people are asking, well, why don't they change the pricing? I'm sort of paraphrasing here to make this straw man kind of work. And that's a very good question. That's sort of how they've developed into these showdown slates, the pick'ems, and some of the other stuff. The reason they try to keep the pricing consistency is so content providers can keep consistent content throughout the day. There were times when they had all sorts of contest formats. They had different sizes, like FanDuel way back in the day used to have, if it's a 50,000 cap, they had their expert game that was a $40,000 cap using the same pricing. So basically what they're trying to do is make it consistent so people can, help people go play on their sites. That's why they don't change it a lot. What does change on these slates is now, instead of, focusing on the starters and one or two key reserves, you got to kind of figure out which 8th or 9th man in this particular situation or matchup has a decent chance of doing better than they would in other situations. And that's where so much of the value here at Awesemo comes through, when you've got guys like, Adam and Greg and Spags and all those guys. They're building their own projections. They're crawling through these game flow box scores, substitution patterns, all of that stuff. That's where we can provide value for you guys on these shorter late slates. So we're kind of trying to help do a little bit more teaching on these shows, just so you can see what the difference is. Because just coming in and pressing optimize, congratulations, you've now got a very chalky lineup on these slates.
Which, by the way, also, it's a 2-game slate. People are asking where the value is. There often isn't value on 2-game slates. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It's a 2-game slate. There's always going to be overlap. At least on DraftKings, it's a little easier to avoid the overlap than on FanDuel. If all the chalk plays hit on FanDuel, then you're going to get a 2,000-way tie for first place, just given the way the lineup constraints are. DraftKings is at least more lineup combinations where it eliminates the chance for that. But that's also why when we were talking about the Detroit-Utah game, I said, let's talk about the game script where the game turns into a blowout. And that's where I said guys like Josh Jackson, Isaiah Stewart, those are guys who are not nearly as popular plays. Isaiah Stewart project for 8% ownership on DraftKings, and Josh Jackson projected for 7%. Those are type of differentiation plays that not necessarily the highest likelihood of going off, but I think a better chance than what their ownership is just based on the potential game script there.
Yes. Thank you. That's a good way of talking about that. Anything else coming through and we'll have plenty of time for questions here. Anything as you comb through the remainder of the Boston side, Williams, Tice, anything at all? And then we can talk about Brad Wanamaker revenge.
So, I mean, nothing crazy to add. I mean, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are both good plays. I think Jason Tatum's going a little bit over-owned on FanDuel at nearly 70%, but I can't talk anybody off Jason Tatum on a 2-game slate. Just somebody that if you're playing multiple lineups, I think it's worth going underweight to the field on him on FanDuel. The 58% ownership on DraftKings looks about fair. Then talking about some of the other guys, you mentioned Daniel Tice. Tice is actually somebody who I rostered on the main slate also. I think that he is going a little bit overlooked on the slate as a whole. 28% on the 2-game slate on FanDuel. That's a little bit too low for me, 4,500. And you have to look at the starting lineup that the Celtics are playing without Marcus Smart. Instead of going with a smaller lineup, they're starting the Daniel Tice and Tristan Thompson front court together. So that leads you to think that they're going to play more bigger lineups, and that's going to benefit both Thompson and Tice, Robert Williams to a smaller extent, except I think that Daniel Tice is the guy that I have the most interested in that front court. And also considering the ownership, which isn't none, but I mean, for a 2-game slate for him to have 18% ownership on DraftKings and the number I read before, 28% on FanDuel, that's too low for me. I think that's a guy that's worth going overweight to the field on. And also, I think that this is the best way to talk about the 2-game slates, because it's hard to call anybody a fade on a 2-game slate or say I outright don't like players. So when people ask me about players, I've been thinking about how to approach these 2-game slates and talk about it from a content perspective. I think that's the best way to do it, is say that based on players' ownership, whether I want to be overweight or underweight to the field on them. Because if you're playing, even if you're playing 20 lineups, chances are you have at least some exposure to almost all of the players that are viable, right? Because if you're playing 20 lineups, you're not going to have Jason Tatum in all of them, but you're certainly going to have him in some. There's no way to avoid somebody like that on a 2-game slate. So I think, and people could give me feedback, message me on Twitter if this is how you want us to talk about the 2-game slates. I could talk about some contrarian plays, but then in terms of the popular plays like a Jason Tatum, Steph Curry, guys like that, I think I'll just say whether it makes most sense to be overweight or underweight based on their ownership.
Yeah, and not the leverage I talked about this a little bit on the Saturday show with Terry. It's all a giant math problem these days. Projection sites are so good, and there's so many of them available. It becomes ratios and probabilities. Sorry, I got to get a cough drop here. Hang on. If you want to talk.
All right. Yeah, I'll kill some time. Oh, my God.
Well, I have them right.
All right. It's not like he's going to leave to do it. Look at that. EMac is hacking up a storm. The old lung from, people don't know this, but EMac worked in a coal mine for the first 65 years of his life. And then we really bailed him out. We were able to get him on the YouTube channel here and talk about some DFS. And we're really hoping that saves him from, the black lung, because in the actual story of Zoolander, he was actually Derek Zoolander's dad, and now here he is from the coal mine. You good now, buddy?
I can't do the Zoolander pose, but yes.
Blue steel.
I'm good. All right. A coal miner. No, but I actually did work at a cemetery.
Oh, all right. Well, I was that meant to be uplifting?
No, but you were looking for weirdest job ever. That would coal miner, I think, would be a unique job for a lot of people.
Were you the Undertaker? What did you do? Did you dig graves?
I did, actually. So there we go. Because I was summer help. So, they would use a backhoe. And then when it was time to come to fix everything, I'd have to go climb in there and do all that. So
did you ever open up the caskets and look at dead bodies?
No, I did not. They're in a concrete vault by the time they get to us usually.
How old were you when you had this job?
16 and 17.
Oh, okay. All right. So what was that? 1937 or something? That was a minute ago. It was
just after the Dust Bowl.
All right. So one team left to talk about, the Golden State Warriors. This is really where we have the most interesting value to talk about. We have no James Wiseman, and this isn't going to change the Warriors starting lineup, because James Wiseman had lost the starting job to Kevon Looney. Although I wouldn't really say lost the starting job, even though he gave it up to Looney. They were kind of playing the same role still. It was just Wiseman playing his minutes off the bench as opposed to starting. That kind of was helping his usage out a little bit. Now that he's gone, I think that we could expect Looney to play a few extra minutes. I'm also expecting that we are going to see Eric Paschall play a handful of extra minutes. Not to the point where we're going to see 30 minutes of Eric Paschall or anything, but enough to the point that I think he makes for one of the best plays overall on a points per dollar basis on the late slate. He's one of the best plays overall on the main slate. Funny enough, he has less ownership on DraftKings on the 2-game slate than he did on the full game slate. Did you notice that?
No.
Yes. So the reason being is because there aren't guys to pay up for on the 2-game slate. On the full slate, we had Damian Lillard, we had Russell Westbrook, we had all these options to choose from, and we really needed value. On the late slate, that's not really the case, because we have Steph Curry at 9,600, Jason Tatum at 8,600, and that's kind of it. So you don't need a roster Eric Paschall just based on that, because there aren't people to pay up for. But still, I think based on the ownership, I still think Paschall is a good play on the late slate. I just found it really funny that one of the chalkiest plays on the main slate ends up being not chalky for the late 2-game slate.
That is just wild to think about, but
it's because of pricing.
Yeah, and that's the one constant is we all play with the same pricing. But just as we're talking, where's the value? What are you spending up for? I'm going to get to it before the question pops up. Are you willing to leave any money on the table tonight on either side?
Yeah, always, especially for a 2-game slate. It's more reasonable on FanDuel than DraftKings. I've talked about this with Alex when we've done shows together for 2-game slates. For DraftKings, you don't necessarily have to stretch to leave money on the table, because there's so many different combinations of lineup possibilities that you could play a lineup that doesn't leave salary on the table. We actually saw this for a 2-game slate recently. There was a solo winner that left $0 on the table just because there's so many different lineup combinations. On FanDuel, it's much more reasonable because there's so fewer possibilities. So let's just look at some of the pricing really quick. let's look at point guard, for instance. There are 4, maybe 5 plays that are actually reasonable. There's Steph Curry, Mike Conley, Kemba Walker, Delon Wright. If you want to stretch, you could say Jeff Teague is a viable point guard play also. So there's only so many lineup combinations if you're limiting your player pool to those point guards. And it's not ridiculous to think that Kemba Walker outscores Mike Conley, right? So if I have Kemba Walker projected for more fantasy points than Mike Conley. So if Kemba Walker outscores Conley by just say 1 fantasy point, then there's a very good chance the optimal lineup is going to leave at least $1,300 on the table. That's probably not going to be the case on DraftKings just because there's so much flexibility where you could put players, and that opens up a lot more possibilities. But for FanDuel, I have absolutely no issue leaving a lot of money on the table for a 2-game slate.
All right. One question they want us to loop back on is Grant. Since that was the first president I ever voted for in a presidential election, of course, Ulysses S. Grant. What do you like about Jeremy Grant?
So Jeremy Grant, it's mostly just about pricing. He's a stronger play on FanDuel than DraftKings. His last couple of games have not been great, but that's also come with a big decrease in price. So just 2 games ago, Jeremy Grant was 8,400 on DraftKings, and on FanDuel he was about the same. He was up to 8,500 on FanDuel. And now we're seeing him at 6,800 on FanDuel, and then on DraftKings down to 7,000. So it's really just buying the dip on a guy who has had a really high usage for the Pistons and has played well this year. The matchup is so far from ideal, but on a 2-game slate, I think it's okay to roster him just based on the usage and the dip in price, and hope that the efficiency comes back a little bit, because at least on FanDuel, there's not all that many small forwards to roster. And then on DraftKings, just with the flexibility, I think that he's viable. At least points per dollar, I would rather roster Jaylen Brown if you could get to him. But Jeremy Grant, I think, makes for the, let's see, I could just go through. Of the small forward eligible players on DraftKings, I think that Paschall points per dollar is the best play. I think Jaylen Brown is the second best play, Wiggins the third best play, and then Grant the fourth best play with small forward eligibility on DK.
All right. I see my friend Michael Whelan Wheels in chat there. Hey, Wheels, if you're in Slack, you can message me in Slack directly, too. I know he won one of the Fred VanVleet contests there. Reminder, guys, we do have a big giveaway here on the Awesemo_COM Twitter handle, our main Twitter handle. I'm going to drop that link into chat. We want to thank you for getting us to 50,000 subscribers. Phenomenal milestone, and we are very appreciative. In such, to show our appreciation, we will be giving away 50 1-week, that's 50 1-week passes. Go follow that pinned tweet there. There's some instructions. The entry into that contest expires at noon tomorrow. So definitely go check that out. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Chad Moody, for reposting this. He said, do you have any thoughts on Bogdanovic? Is his playing time going to be affected by blowout run at all, or a blowout scenario?
So I did answer him in Slack, but relative to the ownership and the price on Bogdanovic, I think he makes for a pretty weak play on this slate. Alex doesn't have him projected particularly well. I have him projected a little bit higher, but even so, he's 5,900 on DraftKings. His FanDuel price is at 5,700. It's a little bit too pricey for me. I think there's much better plays at the position.
All right, and then I forgot. Please do hit that like button. We appreciate it. Oh. Look at this. Now my nemesis, my arch rival in all DFS head-to-heads, Melissa, says, now whenever I see a show with EMac, Coal Miner's Daughter is going to be playing in my head. Classic movie. Sissy Space. Was it Sissy? Tommy Lee Jones. I know she was.
When you said your nemesis, I thought you were going to say Seth. Is Seth not your nemesis?
Seth is my Twitter arch enemy. Enemy for life. He's now writing something too in chat, so I'm sure I'm going to hear about that. He when he saw the Fred VanVleet elite performance, I think he fainted and hit his head on the coffee table. So he's probably just coming to do. Oh yes, a bigger day for me: Fred VanVleet today or my wedding day.
What's the answer?
Tough call. Tough call. That will be answered in premium Slack after hours.
This is the after hour show.
I couldn't think of something for after hours. I guess I could have just gone with that. No, definitely my wedding day was better, but
yeah,
it was close. I had to think about it. I had to buy myself some time to get out of that one.
Yeah, how many threes did your wife hit on your wedding day?
Oh, there were some splash plays. Oh,
See, I was leaning into your answer being one, and it was you. But that was the setup. The alley oop didn't go as well as I'd hoped for.
No, that's all right. All right, just looking here, scanning. Nothing exciting for news. I'll keep looking here for some questions here. Well, here's a good one. Best shooting guard or small forward, 45 or 100 or less on FanDuel.
Shooting guard or small forward?
Yes.
And you said 4,400 or less?
45.
45. Let's see. Shooting guard, or I'm going to say Josh Jackson, just based on what I said before about the potential blowout there. It's still not my favorite play overall, but at least as a tournament play, I think he's worth getting some exposure to. Not somebody to play in a cash game. I think cash games are pretty tough to play for 2-game slates, but he would be my choice on FanDuel as the best play in that price range.
All right. Let's see. Official starting lineups are in. I'll just read them for you guys. Got 9 minutes to go. For Boston, it's Tatum, Tice, Tristan Thompson, Brown, Kemba Walker. For the Warriors, it is Wiggins, Draymond Green, Kevon Looney, Kelly Oubre, Steph Curry. So no surprise there. Juan Toscano Anderson active, of course, tonight. Poole. Oh, I didn't realize Poole wasn't with the team. Poole, Mannion, and Smailagic are in the G League bubble for the Warriors. So that is worth noting, just in case anything's going on with your particular stat provider or projections provider. Ours are free today. Got a few minutes to go check those out.
I would hope that nobody's rostering Smailagic on this 2-game slate, because he has played 0 minutes this season off the top of my head.
We've seen plenty of weirdness. Pistons starting DeLon Wright, Ellington, Grant, Griffin, Plumlee, Utah, Conley, Mitchell, Bogdanovich, O'Neal, and Gobert. Nothing overly exciting there. How do you feel about Wayne? I only make buckets, Ellington, as a fantasy option tonight.
I think that he is
better or worse than Derrick Rose.
Worse than Derrick Rose. I'd rather roster Derrick Rose for 700 more on FanDuel, and then on DraftKings, Derrick Rose is at 4,500 and Ellington is at 5,000. So yeah, I think Derrick Rose is a better play. Certainly on FanDuel where he's cheaper. I mean on DraftKings where he's cheaper, and then even FanDuel at a more expensive price. I'd rather go to Derrick Rose there as well.
All right, this is for wheels there. We'll get you squared away, my friend. We'll get you squared away. All right, what else? Any betting? What do you do? As we have now, Virginia just came online a week ago. We have Michigan online. There's a couple more states standing by. So more and more people are able to do betting. Do you ever do any of the in-game betting? Do you look at basketball player props, anything like that? Any tips you want to convey to our audience?
So I don't do a whole lot of in-game betting. Here's the situation where I would do it, and also this generally needs to mean that I'm watching the games and really be paying attention when I'm going on what's going on. Here's an example of a situation where it makes sense to do an in-game bet. So playoff game, the Clippers were playing against the Mavericks, and Kristaps Porzingis got ejected for a bogus technical foul in the second quarter. It's a very random game, except it's just a situation I remember off the top of my head. The live in-game betting often will just run throughout the game on sites like FanDuel and DraftKings. So if you see a player get in foul trouble, get ejected from a game, or get hurt during a game, if you could place a bet on that before the line moves, that's where there's actual value. That's where I think that the live in-game betting actually has value. Other than that, you're probably just guessing and saying, like, I feel like this team is going to win, and you're betting them. I don't think those make for great bets. But if there's reason to actually think that the line has value to it, that's where I jump on it. And those are the situations where somebody gets ejected, there's an injury, or somebody gets into foul trouble. And it's the same way that I kind of bet regular NBA games also is let's just make up a game today. The Nets are playing the Clippers tonight. Let's say right before the game, all of a sudden we found out, hey, James Harden isn't playing. There's going to be a window of like 90 seconds to 2 minutes where you could bet the line before the books take it down. And that's where you're going to find value in NBA betting too, is you want to bet the lines before they actually get a chance to move. So it's kind of value in a lot of the same way that you're getting value in DFS, where like tonight, right? We had Eric Paschall as a perceived value play because James Wiseman's out. We're going to expect Eric Paschall to play extra minutes. The difference with DFS and sports betting is sports betting, the line is going to come down and adjust, whereas DFS, the prices don't change when a player gets ruled out. So you want to try to hit that betting line before the books have a chance to move it. And to me, that's the best way to potentially be able to find betting value. Now, obviously, the difficulty with that is that it has to be time sensitive and you have to be paying attention to the news. Luckily, we have a good way to do this here. If you follow us on Twitter at Awesemo NBA, also follow El Negro Loco DFS, the news god on Twitter. If you turn the notifications on also for Twitter with those accounts, then you're going to get the news right away. And that's actually the best way, in my opinion, to be able to get the news quickly and be able to react to it before the books are able to take the lines down.
All right, we have two other fun things that we have here, and I'm just seeing if any other Tice or Green on FanDuel.
Oh, Tice by never mind. I was thinking of Javonte Green. Draymond Green over Daniel Tice. And then I don't know why I was thinking that he was referencing Javonte Green, but yeah, Draymond Green is the better play of the two.
All right, I'm going to drop this in. This is for Awesemo Odds. So we have two sister sites. Well, we have more than two, but Awesemo Odds and Odd Shopper. On Awesemo Odds, you're going to find some articles talking about different player props, different booster bets, things like this. Those are all free articles. This is to help you take advantage of the various sports books that are opening in different spots. Right now, they're going into heavy customer acquisition mode. So they're throwing out all sorts of deals like money guaranteed bets. A booster would be like, as long as the Chiefs score more than 2 points in the Super Bowl, we'll double your money up to $20 or whatever, right? So they're just trying to get you in and deposit. So you want to check that stuff out. The other one is Odd Shopper, and we'll talk about that when we pull that up. Would you go with Mason Plumlee or Daniel Tice?
I prefer Daniel Tice to Mason Plumlee, and assuming that's also a DraftKings question because they don't play the same position on FanDuel. Mason Plumlee is projected. I have him projected for a little bit more fantasy points, but it's only marginal. But Plumlee also has almost double the projected ownership as Tice. So if you're just looking for total points, the answer is Plumlee if it's a cash game situation. But if it's a GPP, I think relative to ownership, Daniel Tice is a little bit of a better option.
All right, you're asking Blake Griffin projection. Hey, the projections are free today, but I'll tell you on DK it's 27.6. I'm going to assume it's pretty close to that on FanDuel. It is 25.98, so very close. Nothing exciting there. I'm going to drop in this other link here. This is the Awesemo Odds Odd Shopper page. So this one's kind of fun. I put it on the player props. We have all sorts of rushing yard props. The Super Bowl, of course, is on Sunday. We're going to have 3 hours of shows leading up to the Super Bowl. We have all sorts of content, so we'll definitely want to check that out. Just looking. Yes, he said it was for that. What last question was for DK. All right, I think we got
other questions people have asked. I've just been writing answers in Slack chat.
Okay,
I'm
perfect.
multitasking.
That's why it's great doing shows with you. You're looking at the chat. Some of our hosts or our analysts don't like to look at chat, so I'm usually try to get them all in there. But we're trying to tell you guys so much on all the good free content that we have coming in here for before the Super Bowl. So you'll want to check that out. Please do hit that like button. And then the other fun thing that we have is we're doing this all over again tomorrow. Last question: Wanamaker or Paschall? Are they the same price, Wanamaker or Paschall?
I mean, they have to be about the same price, right?
About the same, probably within a couple hundred of each other.
It's Paschall for me. So it's just Wanamaker is coming off of a good game. He scored 22 fantasy points, but that was also a blowout game against the Pistons. Once again, Pistons on this slate, they get blown out a lot. But the Warriors won that game by 27, so Wanamaker ended up playing 21 minutes in that game. If you look at the other recent games for Wanamaker where they've actually been competitive, he generally plays around 15 minutes. So it's hard to expect big minutes from Brad Wanamaker. Not that Eric Paschall typically plays big minutes, except he's a better points per minute fantasy producer than Brad Wanamaker. And I think he's probably more likely to play extended minutes than Wanamaker is tonight, just because we have the extra minutes to go around the front court with James Wiseman out.
All right, so the other cool thing we do have over there on Odd Shopper, one, it helps you shop all the lines. It's got 4 different sports books up there. It shows you where the different player props are, where the different lines are, etc. And then it also shows you the vigorish, the plus or the minus. Are you laying money to get a different number, or are you taking money to take a different number? So definitely you want to check that out. You can also track your bets there. Just set up a free account on that, and you can do that. It's not tied into the Awesemo account for that, but you can use it to find the best lines out there. And that is something that's very, very key, because every little percentage or two you can find in your favor is going to help you out, because sports wagering, very, very difficult. Again, we're starting this all off tomorrow, 10 a.m. NBA strategy show, Lofty and Josh. At noon, we're going to have Lofty back with Matt Kajeski looking at the first look at the Super Bowl. We've got at 4 o'clock, the daily game plan. This is a premium feature. This is something that Alex started doing a couple years ago, but now we have some other DFS luminaries in the company, and they're doing it as well. This is the Colts. Steve Buzzard is now with us. He's one of our behind the scenes guys now, but he has made a couple $1 million playing DFS. He specializes in all of the sports. He's really good in MMA, all showdown slates, late slates, football. You've seen him on the contrary. He's excellent at basketball. I'm assuming he must be good at baseball as well. We haven't talked about that yet, but that's coming right around the corner here. So that's something that's a cool feature behind the scenes that we're doing 4 or 5 days a week on the weekdays with Alex and Steve. And then at 6 o'clock, we're doing 5:45. We got a big slate tomorrow. 5:45 early start, Lofty and Adam, and then 6 Spags and Nerd Ass Greg.
You better believe it.
All right. Well, that would be one Greg Ehrenberg. 7:45. The fun keeps on going. We have Live Before Lock, PGA style with Ben Rossa and Jason Roslin. And then finally at 8:45, NBA Late Slate Live Before Lock is going to be me and Eric Lindquist doing our first show together. So that should be a lot of fun. Wow, we've got we're almost like a broadcast network with the amount of shows we put out every day, Greg.
It more than like a broadcast network. It is a broadcast network, and that is why everybody should subscribe to the Awesemo YouTube channel. We just hit 50,000 subscribers, and ever growing, because we don't stop at 50,000. We go to 50,001, 50,002. And on to numbers that neither EMac or I could count. So definitely help out the channel, subscribe, like the video, all that good stuff, because that will help us grow. And hey, more opportunities for EMac and I to hang out, and we could make up more stories about EMac's background.
Excellent. Looking forward to learning my own origination story. With that, gamers, you can follow me at EMac DFS. It is G Ehrenberg DFS, and of course, Awesemo_COM. Go check out that pinned tweet. Get yourself 1 week of Awesemo free content. We're giving 50 of those away. That locks at noon tomorrow. With that, gamers, good luck.